Chapter 8 of the Duck-Footed Hound by Jim KJELGAARD. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Melinda. Melly Garson sat on an overturned pickle keg, sourly contemplating the inequity of fate. If he was no better than the next man, he told himself, neither was he worse. So why should some be rewarded with a free buggy ride, while others received a kick from the mules pulling the buggy? Melly shifted his right foot, the newest reason for eating bitter bread, and glared at the crutches without which he was helpless. It was indeed a bitter blow, but it seemed to Melly, as he sat there, his entire life had been one blow after another. Though he was the father of children, the very fact that there was no son among them was a desperate situation. How did one hand a coonhound, not to mention the mass of coon lore that Melly had acquired during his 67 years on Earth, down to a girl child? The lusty wail of a child floated out of the house. Melly shuddered, and only by exercising heroic effort could he refrain from putting his hands over his ears. It was not that he didn't love his daughters, and do for them as a proper father should, but did his 13th child, now yelling away in her crib, have to be a girl too? Melly ran down the list of his offspring: Marilyn, Maxine, Martha, Minerva, Margaret, Mildred, Minnie, Melinda, Mary, Maud, Marcy, Marcella, and finally, Michelle. There had been some hope they'd run out of M's, but he'd hoped that clear back when Mary arrived, and now hope was dead. He couldn't have thought of Michelle, but his daughters could, and that, he supposed, was no more than he deserved for exposing them to Miss Cathby's school. Melly often wondered if he'd been born in the wrong time of the moon. Maybe he'd even been born in a cow, but he'd never known whence came his talent for fathering girls, because by the time he started wondering, his parents had gone to their eternal reward, and it was too late to ask them. He sighed. 13 girl children were 13 facts of life that nobody could change. There were rare intervals, when they didn't all start talking at once, that it was even pleasant to have them around. But how to explain the rest of his misfortunes? Melly retraced the chain of events that had culminated in this stark tragedy. Morning Glory, his pup out of Ross Stanfield's Queenie by Butt Johnson's Thunder, showed every indication of becoming a rare coonhound indeed. Though Melly would have been satisfied had she inherited the talent of either parent, there were reasons to believe she combined the best of both. However, Glory must have some education, and tonight, this matchless autumn night, Ross Stanfield and Queenie and Butt Johnson with Thunder were meeting at Mundy's house. Had they planned a coon hunt, and that only, Melly would have contented himself with just being heartbroken. But Munn and Harky Mundy were going along with Duckfoot, and Melly had been invited to bring Glory. So, yesterday he'd been mule-kicked. Melly groaned in his misery. Glory and Duckfoot had an opportunity to learn their trade under masters such as Queenie and Thunder. Now Glory couldn't go, and what had Melly ever done to merit such catastrophe? No doubt Duckfoot would be there, and thinking of Duckfoot, Melly wondered why a little of the Mundy luck couldn't rub off on Melly Garson. It had been a terrible blow to lose precious Sue, but to stumble on Sue's pup, even if he was half duck, and to find that he probably would be as good as Sue ever was. How come the Mundys were so favored? Melly glanced bitterly around as a mule-drawn wagon came from behind the barn. Morning Glory wagged contentedly behind it, and 4 of Melly's daughters comprised the crew that was bringing in another load of corn. Melly fixed his eyes on Melinda. 12 years old, and with limber as a willow withe, and pretty as a week-old colt, she was driving the self-same mules that had kicked Melly right out of the coon hunt. Furthermore, she was driving them more skillfully than her father ever had. Melly permitted himself a troubled frown. Certain Melinda would be a boy, and a firm exponent of starting the worthwhile things of life as early as possible, Melly had even dickered for a hound pup so the 2 babies might grow up together. Somebody had crossed him up or sneaked up on him, but Melinda should have been a boy. She could throw a rock straighter than Harky Mundy, catch bass while Melly himself couldn't lure them, handle in perfect safety mules that could kick flies off each other's ears, and were anxious to kick anything else. She could do everything most boys could, and do it better. If more was needed, Glory adored her with a passion few hounds bestow on any human. Melinda backed the wagon into the barn, and as her 3 sisters started to unload the corn, she unhitched the mules and drove them to their stable. A fiendish plan formed in Melly's brain. Girls were about as welcome on a coon hunt as bees at a sewing circle. But why should Melly do all the suffering? Melinda came out of the stable and floated toward the house. Melly came to a decision and called, "Melinda!" She danced to him on feet that never seemed to touch the ground. "Yes, Pa?" "Ross Danfield and But Johnson will be at Mondays come evening. They're going to take Duck-Foot on a coon hunt. How'd you like to go with Glory?" "Pa, you mean it?" "Sure I mean it, honey." She stooped and kissed him, and suddenly, Melly felt sorry for unfortunate fathers who do not have at least 13 daughters. Making himself as small as possible, Harky Mundy kept his fingers crossed and hoped Munn had forgotten he was alive. Everything had worked out so much better than he dared hope, but surely there must be some mistake. After 11 days at Miss Cathby's school, he was ready and unwilling to begin the 12th when he happened to glance toward the pasture. He himself, after helping milk them at 5:30, had turned the cows out. But though he turned all 6 out, only 5 remained. Old Brindle, Munn's ornery cow, had decided to take herself for a walk. It was nothing that could be ignored. Old Brindle was fast as a deer, and if she decided she'd had enough of human society, she'd be as hard to catch. "You best help me get her," Munn said. "Yes, Pa." They had scarcely left the house when, apparently having decided that the free life is for those who want it, Old Brindle jumped back into the pasture she just jumped out of. But instead of turning on Harky and roaring for him to be off to school, Munn said nothing at all. It had been as easy as that, which is why Harky worried. Though it was hard even to imagine Munn's having thoughts to spare for Miss Cathby and her school with a coon hunt coming up, dismal experience had taught Harky that it was easier to forecast the next skip of a sand flea than to anticipate Munn. Until he knew exactly how the wind was blowing, Harky thought silence was not only golden, but silver, gold, and diamonds. If Munn was thinking about sending him back to school he would go. If he was not, an incautious word might start him thinking. Harky watched furtively as Munn put on his coon-hunting pants, boots, and curled the brim of his coon-hunting hat. Then he went to the toolbox for his coon-hunting axe. "Harky," he roared, "what's your shotgun doing in my toolbox?" "Why," Harky hoped he appeared innocent. "Is it in there, Pa?" "Get it out." Harky drew his first easy breath since old Brindle's escape. If Munn had forgotten why he'd confiscated Harky's shotgun, he'd forgotten about school. The ordeal was over, at least for this year, and Harky was free to concentrate on important matters. For the immediate future, the only matter of importance consisted of wishing it was night so they could go coon hunting. Evening finally arrived, and, with Queenie and Thunder at their respective heels, Ross Danfield and But Johnson arrived with it. The older hounds sneered in their own fashion at Duck-Foot, who enthusiastically sneered right back and curled up on the porch. None of the men, as yet, knew that Melly was sending his daughter to substitute for him. When Queenie, Thunder, and Duck-Foot set up a desultory baying, all thought that Melly would join them shortly. To do so, he would follow the prescribed etiquette of the creeping hills, which involved opening the door and walking in. When Melly did not enter, but someone knocked, the 4 hunters first looked astounded. Then they looked at each other. It was Harky who decided that one way to find out who was knocking would be to open the door. His astounded bellow made Queenie cringe and sent Thunder slinking from the porch. "What in Tunket do you want?" "Hello, Harold," Melinda trilled. She was dressed in the boys' trousers she always wore except when she went to school, a boys' shirt which immediately gave the lie to the theory that girls can't wear boys' clothing and look like girls, and a denim jacket. Her feet were encased in an old pair of shoes, and a boy's hat was pushed back on her saucy black curls. Without a second glance for Harky, she walked past him into the kitchen. "Pa's been meal-kicked and can't come," she announced. "I brought Glory." "Right kind of ya," said Munn. "We'll take good care of her and see she gets back." "Oh, I'll take her back myself," Melinda said. "Pa will expect it." "Nice of you to offer," said Munn. "But Harky and me, we sort of batch it here. The house ain't rightly fixed for a girl to stay in, and we may be gone all night." "Don't you worry about that, Mr. Mundy," Melinda reassured him. "I'm going hunting with you." Harky gagged. Melinda turned to face him. "You sound as though you've been eating green apples, Harold," she said sweetly. Have you? Why don't you go home? Harky, Mun roared, but not very loudly. Mind your tongue. Thank you, Mr. Mundy, Melinda said, with the barest hint of a sob in her young voice. You do want me along, don't you? Well, Munn stammered and appealed to Ross Stanfield. We do want her along, don't we? Well, Raw aped Munn and looked at Butt Johnson, but stuttered, why, and fixed his gaze on Harky. There, Melinda said triumphantly. The other three want me. Now what do you say? Hope you fall in the mud. Harold! Melinda wrinkled her distinctively fetching nose. How terrible! Hope you fall in the mud and I'll stomp on your head if you do, Harky said. Harky! This time Munn voiced a full-throated roar. Mind your tongue! Let's get coon hunting, Ross Stanfield choked. Let's do anything as long as we get out of here. End of chapter 8.